Hello, my dear children. Today I am going to talk to you about John Milton's Areopagitica. Now, you all know Milton very well, and Milton is remembered as a great poet, but his fiery attack on the censorship and the call for free press reveals a brilliant English radical. And John Milton is perhaps the most notable amongst them. He was born in 1608 and educated at Cambridge. He devoted many years of his midlife to the politics of the Commonwealth. He was arrested during the Restoration period, but later on he was released. And because of his blindness and old age, he died in 1674. And this particular speech, you can say this speech was for the liberty of the unlicensed printing to the Parliament of England. And the title of Areopagitica pays deliberate homage to Areopagiticus of the famous Greek author Isocrates. Now, what is most important about John Milton's this piece of work? First of all, he says, well, everybody should have freedom of speech, isn't it? And he protests against and calls for the repeal of the licensing order of 1643, which required that all books to be reviewed by the official censor before being published. Now, Milton begins his argument by praising Parliament's history of defending liberty. He then explains that a free press was highly valued because of the ancient and the Greek Roman societies. Milton also provides examples of tyranny through censorship, such as those in the Roman Catholic Church. Now, Milton argues that a destruction of literature deemed inappropriate or unacceptable does not benefit society, as it offsets the balance of good and evil and hinders a person's pursuit of the truth. Milton readily believed that a person's reasoning skills would guide them, and if the parliament was truly Christian, it would see the value in letting citizens experience these trials of morality. And he finally claims that humans will always experience temptations and that no amount of the meddling, either of politics or of religion, would change that. The number of censors that would be needed to completely rid this world of these temptations would be astronomical and against the country's best interest. Now, Milton argues in this that amongst the most eloquent of all the protests against the prior censorship that was ever written, in this religious politics of the 17th century England, where the religious cross currents of the Reformation and the Counter Reformation inflamed passions, as the French Revolution and the Soviet communism did in later centuries. As you all know, that French Revolution was also meant for achieving liberty, equality, and fraternity. Even William Wordsworth went out to French from England to fight for these ideals. But what does it result in? The French Revolution also was not a revolution for these ideals at all. It turned into a military aggression. And Wordsworth was very, very disturbed in leaving his premises, leaving nature, and joining hands in order to join this revolution. So, what all these revolutions lead to? They lead to nothing. They only create chaos and confusion. And this particular piece of work of Milton, this particular prose work, is famous because it outlasted the circumstances of its original publication. On June 14, 1643, the English Parliament had passed a law called the Licensing Order, which required that all books should be approved by an official censor before publication. And on November 23, 1644, Milton wrote this piece of work pleading for the repeal of the law. His arguments were not very successful. Official censorship of books in England lasted until the 19th century, but this piece of work had long been an inspiration for those demanding a free press. In fact, its argument against censorship are nearly as fresh and convincing today as they were in those days of the 17th century. Milton realized how difficult it would be to change the Parliament's opinion, so he marshaled his arguments with great subtlety. His title alludes to the famous speech by the Greek educator Isocrates, and Milton uses a classical argumentative structure and many techniques of classical rhetoric that would have commanded respect from his 17th century audience. Yet, the modern reader, that is the present day reader, today is unaware of that classical rhetoric, and it can still marvel at the cleverness and logic of that Milton has used to persuade his contemporary lawmakers, you can say, those who were licensing and they were putting a hold on this order. He begins by praising Parliament for its defense of liberty in the past. He then offers a very historical view of censorship, pointing out that freedom of the press was highly valued in ancient Greek as well as the Roman culture. And Milton uses, he traces the tradition of this tyrannical censorship, which he is condemning in the Roman Catholic Council of Trent and the Spanish Inquisition, both of which found few champions amongst the members of the English Protestant Parliament. And as he points out, that the Roman Catholic Church was a traditional enemy of the free loving Parliament. And Parliament was loving that freedom. Milton's next tactics was to disarm that argument that censorship serves society by destroying bad books. No, well, you can say censorship is essential because if you want to discriminate between the good books and the bad books, you must put a censor on the bad books. But who is going to form that judgment? Who is going to make that judgment? That is the important part. And for making a judgment, you need reasoning. How can you pass an argument in favor of something and in disfavor of another thing unless and until you tend to reason out? So, in a world where good and evil are often intermingled and difficult to discern, the reading of all the books, whether they are good or bad, they contribute to the human attempt to understand and pursue truth. So, God gave human beings reason as a reliable guide, and judgment is the exercise of reason. True Christian virtue rests in facing trials and choosing wisely. In one of the most famous passages of this text, Milton says, "He that can apprehend and consider wise and all her baits and seeming pleasures, and yet abstain, and yet distinguish, and yet prefer that which is truly better, he is the true warfaring Christian." That is the most important part. That is how far you are able to exercise your powers. And in fact, Milton says himself, he writes, he was, one thing is very much true about Milton, and what was most complimentary was that he said he could write with his left hand, that was prose, and with his right hand, that is poetry. And to understand him better and to locate him in England of the Civil War and the subsequent Restoration period, his readers need to reconcile these two parts of his genius. And finally, he had said that a good book is a precious lifeblood of a master spirit, embalmed and treasured up on purpose to a life beyond life. So that is the most important thing, that you must understand that piece of work and this prose piece of work in which he has talked about this licensing and censorship, and he talks about the liberty that should be given to a man is very important in making a judgment, because he says, well, everybody has must be given the freedom to decide and judge on their own what is to be adopted and what is to be shunned. So, this was just in short telling you a little bit about this particular piece of this important speech of Milton, that was given regarding the censorship of the licensing and of the free press. So I hope you have got a gist of it. Thank you so much.